In tonight's Government Insider, a federal spending spree. Tuesday marks the beginning of Uncle Sam's push to spend the rest of its 2015 funding, and agencies are rushing to the finish line. For insight, we turn to our guest tonight on Capitol Insider, Francis Rose, host of In Depth with Francis Rose on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. All right, Francis, the fiscal year ends on the last day of September, and agencies are rushing to spend all of their unused funds. Is it a case of use it or lose it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, Morris. They have to move the money that they've got in this year's budget, fiscal 2015, out the door by September 30th, or it goes back to the Treasury. And so that's exactly what's going on here. Agencies have just till the end of this month to get that money obligated. It doesn't have to actually physically have checks written, but that money must be obligated, is the term, to contracts for products and services that the agency needs to fulfill its mission. Whether that product or service is actually delivered by the end of September doesn't matter, but the contracts have to be written in order for that money to be spent, or it goes back to the general coffers.
Something about this, when this comes up, it always seems like we're wasting money. How much money are these agencies going to spend over the next 30 days, and where will it all go?
Well, it's going to be billions and billions of dollars, Morris, and it's going to go for just about everything that the government does. The primary focus that we've been following at Federal News Radio is information technology. The federal government spends, it believes, about $80 billion on information technology every year, although the Government Accountability Office says that there are lots of ways that the government spends money on IT that don't get categorized as IT. So the GAO believes that the number that the government spends on IT is a lot higher than $80 billion, but that's the number primarily that people throw around when it comes to information technology in government. That's where the focus of our work has been. And the reason for that is all of the things that you and I talk about on an ongoing basis, Morris, the issues at the Department of Veterans Affairs and other places where information technology has proven to be difficult for the federal government to do things. The Federal Chief Information Officer, Tony Scott, has talked about this just recently, about the way that this money is spent so rapidly at the end of the calendar year, or the fiscal year, rather.
You were talking about Tony Scott. He says this is a really bad way to run IT, calling the practice frivolous. What else did he have to say, Francis?
Well, the main criticism that he has is that this leads to mediocre IT procurement. It leads to people trying to get something done for the sake of getting something done, rather than for the sake of getting a quality project underway. It also, and that's the other point that he makes, is not the fault of the people who are doing the spending, it's the fault of the system, and that is that year-by-year planning, and thereby this end-of-year fiscal year spending, leads to short-term strategy and deployment rather than long-term investments. Rather than thinking about what's our IT strategy going to be for the next 2, 3, 5 years, you have to think a year at a time. And especially with the way that the agencies have been jerked around with continuing resolutions, shut down, sequester, and all of that, there's no certainty whatsoever as we sit right now as to what an agency is going to be able to do for spending October 1st of this year, let alone 6 months from now or a year from now. So those are really the concerns that Tony Scott is expressing, and there are a lot of people both on the Hill and in the executive branch that agree with him.
And people like us, certainly. Before we go, let's talk about the federal pay raise. President Obama has okayed a 1% pay hike for federal employees and 1.3% for the military. How are federal employee unions responding?
Well, the unions are kind of sheepishly, that's not fair, they're kind of apprehensively going along with the idea of a 1% pay raise. The new president of the National Treasury Employees Union says it's okay. He believes that federal employees deserve a higher raise than that, a bigger raise. But the employee groups overall are still kind of off the record saying, at least it's not a pay freeze like federal agencies had in place for a number of years, Morris.
It's always good to get your insight. We'll have you back again. Francis Rose, host of In Depth with Francis Rose on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you, Morris.